Now the upper end of the humerus. The humerus consists of an upper end, the head, the greater tuberosity, the shaft, the head, the greater tuberosity, the shaft, the bicipital groove, and the lesser tuberosity. And this shaft, as it goes down, gets converted into the lateral and the medial epicondyle, which articulate in the capitulum and the trochlea. The trochlea and the capitulum anteriorly have a conoid fossa above the capitulum and a coronoid fossa above the trochlea, because the coronoid process of the ulna will go into the coronoid fossa and the head of the radius will go into the conoid fossa, and that will increase the range of flexion. So, articulating with the trochlea is the coronoid process of the ulna, and with the capitulum is the radius, and they articulate with each other, forming the radioulnar joint also. If you want to see the ulna, this is the olecranon process, this is the coronoid process, you are seeing it from the side. This is the olecranon, and this is the coronoid. And the coronoid olecranon fossa is behind this, and olecranon goes into this fossa to allow complete extension, and the conoid and the coronoid fossa allow increased degree of flexion. That's why the fossae. Now, so there is the upper end, a shaft, and the lower end, and lower end consists of lateral and medial epicondyles, capitellum, and trochlea. The trochlea, the medial part of the trochlea is larger and more oblique, so that the ulna is basically directed a little bit outside in relation to the humerus, and these two form what is called as the carrying angle. So this is the lower articulation, and this head articulates with the glenoid cavity of the scapula. The supraglenoid tubercle, the coracoid process, the suprascapular notch, the medial border, the glenoid labrum, the lax part of the capsule attached to the anatomical neck, the long head of the biceps coming from the supraglenoid tubercle passing in the bicipital groove, the subscapularis muscle arising from the anterior surface of the scapula going to get inserted into the lesser tuberosity, the teres minor going behind the lax part of the capsule and getting attached to the lower part of the greater tuberosity, and the sit structures, the supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor getting attached to the posterior part of the greater tuberosity. The short head of the biceps coming from the coracoid, The long head coming from the supraglenoid tubercle, plastered in the bicipital fossa, bicipital groove, by the extension of the capsule, which is the bicipital ligament, and the bicipital groove giving attachment to the lady between two majors. So here is one major, the teres major, and here is the other major, the pectoralis major, and the latissimus dorsi is coming around the lower border of the teres major, getting inserted into the base. So here you will have the lady between the two majors, teres major and pectoralis major. Behind, if you look at this humerus from behind, this is the head, this is the greater tuberosity, here is the glenoid, and you will find that there is the spine of the scapula going to form the acromion, like this, and we'll rub off the head because you will not be able to see this part of the head because of the acromion. Because you'll not be able to see the head because of this part of the acromion. What you'll see is the capsule. This is the capsule. Then you will see the supraspinatus coming from the supraspinous fossa, getting inserted into the upper part of the greater tuberosity. The infraspinatus coming from the infraspinous fossa, getting inserted. This is becoming the I, this is becoming the S, and the teres minor coming from this border, lateral border of the scapula, and getting inserted down. Then there is a teres major which goes anterior, again arising from this lateral border. There is this teres major, and from the infraglenoid tubercle, here you have a muscle coming behind the teres minor and going in front of the teres major. This is the long head of the triceps, and this becomes the long head of the triceps, and you have these spaces, the quadrangular space, the medial triangular space, and the lateral triangular space. From the quadrangular space you have the emergence of the axillary nerve and the posterior circumflex humeral artery. From the lateral triangular space you have the emergence of the profunda brachii artery lying in the radial groove, accompanied by the radial nerve. And from this is the lateral border, and After the teres major, there is this angle, inferior angle of the scapula, and you have the latissimus dorsi winding round the lower border of the teres, major, forming the posterior axillary fold and getting inserted into the base of the bicipital groove. So this is the posterior view of the upper end of humerus. Now the humerus shaft consists of, it's triangular. So it has got an anterior border, it has got a lateral border, it has got a medial border. On So it has got a medial border. Then it has got a lateral and medial intermuscular septum, and there is a deep fascia which has an anterior compartment and a posterior compartment. The anterior compartment consists of two muscles, the brachialis, which is attached to the anterior surface, and the biceps, which is not attached to the humerus. Then on the medial side of the medial border is the insertion of the coracobrachialis, and on the lateral side is the insertion of the deltoid. So this is deltoid and this is coracobrachialis. Behind you have the lateral head of triceps and the long head of triceps. Then you have the medial head of triceps, and between the two you have the radial nerve winding round the shaft of humerus, piercing the lateral intermuscular septum, becoming anterior. And lying between the brachialis and the another muscle here, which is the brachioradialis. And the nerve which accompanies, which passes between the biceps and brachialis, passes between the biceps and brachialis and lies in the same groove, supplies biceps, brachialis and coracobrachialis, is the musculocutaneous. So the radial nerve here, accompanied by the profunda brachii artery and the musculocutaneous in front, and both ultimately lying between the brachioradialis and brachialis. So we'll make the marrow of the humerus here. So this is the shaft of the humerus, and as you come down, the capitulum, the trochlea, the conoid and the coronoid fossa, and the medial epicondyle. Then you have the brachioradialis originating from here, and then the common extensor origin. So this is the brachioradialis. The brachioradialis will go down and insert into the radial styloid. radial styloid, and it will flex the elbow in mid-prone position. You can do it and you can check that is exactly what it will do. Then we have this head of the radius and the radial tuberosity. Then we have this coronoid process and of the ulna and the ulnar tuberosity. We have a ligament arising from the upper end of ulna winding around the radial head, which is called as the annular ligament. There is a ligament inferior to the radioulnar joint also, and that is called as the quadrate ligament. And then this part of the radius of the humerus and the radius is covered by the capsule. On the medial condyle is the attachment of the common flexor origin, and here on the lateral epicondyle is the origin of brachioradialis plus the common extensor origin. We'll come to know the name of these muscles, but let us draw the posterior view of the humerus. Here you see the shaft and the medial and lateral condyle, and what you see is the trochlea only and the olecranon. From this trochlea and the olecranon fossa. So here is the articulation of the ulna, and you can see the radial head here, and the capsule is attached like this, and to the olecranon process. This is the capsule that you see, and this is the posterior border of the ulna. Here will be the annular ligament, posterior part, and the capsule will be covering this part also. Now, from the lateral side is common extensor origin, and on this side is the common flexor origin. Above this is the brachioradialis, and above this is pronator teres. Then there is a muscle which arises from the lateral condyle and goes and gets inserted into the posterior part of the posterior border of the olecranon, which is called as amponius. And then there is a muscle which arises from the posterior border and is inserted into winds round the radius, upper part of the radius, and gets inserted onto the supinator crest. So this muscle is called as anconius, and this is called as supinator. Anteriorly, the brachialis will get inserted on this coronoid here, and this will be the supinator crest. You will have the supinator inserted like this, and you will have the tendon of the biceps getting inserted onto the radial tuberosity. So this will become the biceps tendon, and underneath is the brachialis tendon. So this is the insertion of the lower end of the humerus, the origin and insertion of lower end of humerus. Then we will cover the muscles below the elbow. And what are the movements below the elbow? At the radioulnar joint, you have pronation and supination. We'll just learn to name these muscles. Then at the wrist, you have palmar flexion and you have dorsiflexion. And then you have radial deviation and you have ulnar deviation. Then at the MP joints, you have flexion, you have extension, you have adduction, and you have abduction. You can test it on your own. On the PIP and DIP joints, they are hinge joints like this. On the PIP and DIP joints, you have only flexion and extension. Then in the little finger or the thumb, pollex or the thumb, you have abduction, adduction, flexion, extension, and internal rotation, which is called as opponents. The internal rotation of the metacarpal, which is called as opponents. Now let us name the muscles that do this. Let us name the muscles that do these movements. So pronation, pronator teres and pronator quadratus. Supination is supinator with elbow extended, and biceps with elbow flexed. That's why you always flex the elbow when you tighten the screw. Wrist, palmar flexion. Carpi is wrist. So flexor carpi radialis and flexor carpi ulnaris. And there's one more muscle which is palmaris longus. And palmaris longus would flex the wrist with a cupped hand. Then extensors, flexors, then extensors. Extensors are extensor, this is flexor, this is extensor, carpi, radialis, longus and brevis. So you have extensor, flexor carpi radialis balanced by extensor carpi radialis, longus and brevis. And you have extensor carpi ulnaris. Now, so these are the muscles that would dorsiflex. Now, if you want radial deviation, you will Combine extensor carpi radialis longus and brevis with flexor carpi radialis. If you want ulnar deviation, you will combine extensor carpi ulnaris with flexor carpi ulnaris. So this will be achieved by these two, and this will be achieved by these two. Flexion extension will cancel and you will have radial deviation. Then MP flexion is brought about by lumbricals, which will simultaneously extend the PIP and DIP joints. So this is the metacarpal, they will flex this, lumbricals will flex the proximal phalanx and extend the PIP and DIP. It will flex the MP and extend the PIP and DIP. So here is the extensor expansion which will achieve this extension of PIP and DIP, and this extensor expansion is connected to the FDP tendon, flexor digitorum profundus tendon, by the lumbricals. So this is the lumbrical. It will flex here, and when this force passes, it will extend the PIP and DIP. This position is called as intrinsic plus position, and the reverse is extension at MP and flexion at PIP and DIP. So the reverse is, this is the metacarpal, extension here and flexion here. So this becomes claw hand or intrinsic minus. So these are the very, very important muscles called musician muscles, which are the lumbricals. Then MP extension is by long extensors, see these extensors, and they are extensor digitorum, helped for the index finger by extensor indicis, and for the little finger by extensor digiti minimi. Then adductors and abductors, you remember by the formula PAD DAB, palmar introcei adductors and dorsal introcei abductors. Then PIP flexion is done by flexor digitorum superficialis, and PIP flexion is done by this, and PIP extension, we have already told you, is done by lumbricals. The DIP flexion, distal interphalangeal joint flexion, is done by flexor digitorum profundus, and of course extension is again done by lumbricals. Then the little finger abductor, pollicis or digiti minimi. Now the abductor pollicis is longus and brevis. The adductor, so abductor digiti minimi, but abductor pollicis is longus and brevis. The adductor is adductor pollicis, and you don't have an adductor for the little finger because it is the palmar introcei which adducts it. Then flexor is flexor pollicis longus and flexor pollicis brevis, these two. And this is because you don't have any flexor of the little finger, because it's the lumbricus that will flex the MP joint and extend the PIP and DIP joint. So for the little finger you have none. And finally the extensor for the pollex is pollicis extensor for the pollex. So the thumb is pollicis longus and pollicis brevis. Extensor pollicis longus, extensor pollicis brevis. Whereas for the little finger, you don't need an extensor because there's the extensor digitorum and extensor digiti minimi. Then opponens is opponens pollicis and opponens digiti minimi. So you at least learn to remember the names of the muscles that you will get below the elbow.